ABC. 1 plus 1 is 2. Tying our shoes, learning to read. They're all things we probably remember from our very early days. Many of us watch them happen in our own kids. As they get older, they start to learn more and more and more. And when we're younger, things are simple. We don't worry about all the nitty gritty, busy details of life. We leave those to the grown ups. But when we get older, we have more to do, more responsibilities. But something that seems to go right along with those is the pace at which society changes. In my lifetime, we've gone from computers being a rare thing to everybody holding one literally in the palm of their hand. We've gone from spending every free moment playing outside to being glued to screens. Things have gotten busier, more detailed, more advanced. And most people will say the majority of the advancements we've seen have been for the better. Well, what about in your life? Are you doing more? Are you expected to know more? Are you responsible for more? I think sometimes we get so busy, so far along in our own lives that we forget where we came from. And by that, I don't mean where we grew up or our family or where we're from. I mean our roots. The fact that it all started with the basics. ABC, 1, 2, 3, reading, writing, arithmetic. And I'm not here today to say we should turn back the clock 50 years, but lately it's really weighed on me to enjoy every moment and peel back all the superficial stuff and really, for lack of a better phrase, go back to basics. For the next few weeks, I'm going to be sharing a little about how I've applied that principle in some things in my own life and what experts say on the topic and how the scriptures lay out its importance. Every day it seems like there's more and more things in life to pull us off track. Things and experiences and people and situations that take us off course and stop us from achieving our objectives and our goals. Some of our lives have so much. I think about my own responsibilities as a father, a band director, an educator, a composer, a church musician, a radio news reporter. I have so many things to do for so many people. And these things can only be successful with a plan. And most importantly, with boundaries. Today I want to talk about going back to basics with boundaries in our lives. To be bluntly honest, today's culture doesn't really like or encourage a whole lot of boundaries. Today's culture seems to be content with no guidelines, no rules, maybe some warnings here and there, but no firm limits. If you've been a long-time listener, you've heard me use this analogy a lot on guardrails. It's like we're satisfied with painted lines on the edge of the road instead of metal guardrails. You can cross over the lines if you choose, but hitting the guardrails brings you back in line and might even sting a little. The painted lines are there to warn us. It's our choice if we go across them. But guardrails are something a little more stiff. Guardrails are boundaries. As we meet new people, have new experiences, get into new social circles, we get caught up in the people, the details, and we often forget about boundaries. Why are boundaries so important? And why is it dangerous to forget about them? Boundaries aren't to push others away or to limit what you can do. Boundaries aren't to exclude people. Boundaries are to help hold us together. The truth is, without good boundaries, the poor choices we make, or those of others, will monopolize the time and resources we should be using to live our best God-ordained life and will limit our ability to truly serve and show compassion to others. And odds are, at some point, you'll get so exhausted and worn down that you'll lose your self-control and you could spiral into something much different than you'd really like to see. So what if we allow our personal, emotional, social, and ethical boundaries to erode? How do we rebuild? What if we never had them in the first place? Well, I think it starts by coming back to basics when it comes to boundaries in our lives. It starts with remembering this. We were created in God's image, but as unique beings, we're called to love others and accomplish what He has called us to. Unfortunately, we all encounter obstacles which can distract or derail us from what God has planned for us or even paralyze us sometimes. Some of the most difficult obstacles we face are the inability to say no, to confront others when needed, or to establish consequences in relationships. And that looks different for everyone. Think about it this way. Boundaries are your personal property line, where your business and your property line begins and ends. and where you allow that of others to begin. Boundaries help you determine when to say yes, when to say no, and how to say no when necessary. They help you determine what gets in, what goes out, and what belongs, and what needs to leave. They help you own your time, own your energy, own your resources, and your money, and decide for yourself what to do with them. So, when it seems so easy, why is it really so hard? Or rather, why does it seem so hard to have boundaries? I honestly think it's because the word boundary can kind of be scary. We conjure up images of fences, no trespassing signs, and keep out warnings. Plus, as we went through the COVID-19 pandemic, boundaries became more commonplace as we distanced 6 or more feet apart. Wearing masks felt like a boundary in itself. It got very difficult to see facial expressions and really make personal connections with people. Sometimes it's that we don't want to say no. Other times, we focus so much on being loving and giving, we forget our own limits and limitations. It's actually very easy to set boundaries, and I know, as I say all the time, it's easier said than done. It may not seem like it, but it really is. You can set limits and still be a giving, loving, helpful, hardworking person. The problem most of us run into is that we end up feeling guilty. How do you answer someone who wants your time, your love, your energy, or your money? I think this is why we feel that way. Despite being in a culture that is very self-centric, the majority of people truly believe in giving to others. After all, service to others is a hallmark of faith, right? The problem is that over time, I think people of faith have started to believe that the kind of love Jesus called us to is a love with no boundaries, and that leads us to the idea that boundaries are negative. The Bible clearly spells out that this is not the case and why you can have healthy boundaries and still love and serve others. Sometimes we feel like we have to be everything to everyone, share our gifts and our talents until we can't share or give anymore. Even Jesus, who literally could do anything, knew there had to be boundaries. He went to quiet places to pray. He separated himself from large crowds. If Jesus ever felt the need to meet everyone's expectations of him, he would have never had the time to be alone with God. As a Christian, it's tempting to get so caught up in doing the right thing that we become too busy to spend time in God's Word, to pray, to spend time with our families, or even take care of ourselves. Doing more is actually allowing ourselves to do less. I love this perspective. Martin Luther is quoted as saying he prayed 2 hours a day unless he was busy, and then he would pray for 3 hours. Setting a healthy boundary around alone time with God decreases stress and burnout, keeps our focus where it needs to be. And the scriptures literally tell us we need to set healthy boundaries, especially with other people. Look at Proverbs 25:17. This is the NIV. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you, and they will hate you. Well, I don't know if they'll hate you, and it doesn't mean to ignore them, but they might get sick of seeing so much of you. Not only do we need to set healthy boundaries for ourselves, but it's important to respect the boundaries of anybody we consider close, whether it's a family member, a neighbor, or a colleague. In other words, don't wear out your welcome. Another place we need to set those boundaries is with people who just all the time have a negative mindset. Proverbs 26:4 says this in the NIV, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him." We must protect ourselves by setting healthy boundaries from those who constantly want to argue and speak poorly of others, as our time and engagement in those conversations quickly leads to our own negativity. Our pastor just spoke about this past weekend, how being judgmental, how being so negative can lead to a hard heart. We shouldn't feel guilty about distancing ourselves from those that have a negative influence on us. And here's the part where I feel most of us struggle: saying no. It can be easier to say yes than no to keep from hurting somebody's feelings. Sometimes saying no is the answer that's the healthiest for you. Believe it or not, sometimes no is the answer that's the healthiest for the other person too. I used to be a yes man, constantly filling the schedule with as much as I could, but I found out that stretching myself, wearing myself thin, doing things just because I felt obligated wasn't always the right thing. And it certainly wasn't benefiting most of the people involved. Yes wasn't always the right answer. Learning to say no when it's appropriate is the start of setting healthy boundaries. And this is where things tie back to our main topic for today, getting back to basics. How do we make boundaries part of our basic living? Just like tying our shoes, getting dressed, eating meals, brushing our teeth is so commonplace. How do boundaries become part of who we are, even on the simplest of levels? Well, I think it comes down to this. If you want to think about your heart for a moment, I'm going to use this visual. Your heart is what keeps your entire body going. It literally helps everything inside you function properly. Your entire life depends on how healthy your heart is. In reality, all your actions, how you relate to other people, treat yourself, and ultimately how you connect with God is directed by what happens in your heart. Look at it from the perspective of your health. If you don't take care of your body, eat right, sleep well, you're less likely to be healthy. Where if you do take care of your body, eat right, and sleep well, you're going to be healthier. When it comes to watching our heart or guarding it, otherwise known as setting boundaries, so many of us seem to think that saying no is selfish, when in reality, it's taking responsibility to guard yourself. Trust me when I say that this should be a priority. You have to use wisdom to know when to say yes and when to say no. And in everyday decision making, it's much more than right or wrong. Wisdom is better than right or wrong. What's the wise thing to do? We probably all can say having boundaries around our work and our home lives is something we should probably do. Even so, finding the time to change unhealthy behaviors, learn, or build new habits is easier said than done. Boundaries as a solution literally sit right in front of us. When we define what we need to feel secure and healthy when we need it, and create patterns and tools to protect those parts of ourselves, we can do literal miracles for our well being, which in turn allows us to be the best versions of ourselves. If you're having trouble setting boundaries, I would challenge you first to change your mindset about how boundaries work. Understand that boundaries are limits you identify for yourself and apply through action or communication. It doesn't mean you get everything you want when you want it, but it does mean there are small things within your control that you can do to protect your time and energy. All of us, I think, should have what I call soft boundaries and hard boundaries or firm boundaries. Firm boundaries are the non negotiables. You know, the things you're unwilling to compromise on or need to act on right away. Think of them as things you will never do or never accept as reasonable, while soft boundaries are things you are more likely to compromise on. Think of them as principles you like to follow, but you can be flexible around without compromising your faith. For example, maybe there's a school activity going on after school hours. My first reaction is, well, that's after school. I already have too much to do during the school day. I'm not staying to help. Instead, I could reframe my thinking to be, well, what can I do to contribute that won't require me to stay after? Or what can I do to help that is really already a part of what I do every day? If you need to set boundaries, first, determine your top priorities. Hopefully, your faith life would be first, and then identify what's most important in your family and work. What are the one or two things you're trying to get out of your personal life and your professional life? If you could be straightforward as spending more time with your family or finding a job that prioritizes your well being, name what you can't live without versus what you wish for, and that will help you distinguish the hard and soft boundaries you need to set. Imagine that your life, as it is right now, is no longer possible. What if you get laid off from work? You can't live in the town you live in. Your partner breaks up with you, or you're forced to change careers. What's next? What would you miss? What wouldn't you miss? Once you've reflected on and set those priorities, you can set a boundary. And if you don't have those set, I'd like you to try to set at least one hard boundary, at least one non negotiable. For example, I won't stay any later than 30 minutes after my workday, or I'll only get drive-through coffee one day this week. Those are things you can set in stone. It involves limiting a task or an interaction or an activity that isn't the best use of your time and might be having a negative effect on your life. Being more selective about what and who you give your energy to will allow you to focus only on the items that give you the greatest return on your investment, whether that's more time in prayer, more happiness at home, greater achievement at work, or something else. And I know some of you may be asking, well, it seems selfish. Don't you think you're being a little blunt to focus on yourself and focus on what you want? Well, I think we have to ask ourselves questions like, does it benefit me? And maybe that does sound selfish, but I think you also have to ask yourself, how does this benefit or improve my relationships with others? Because oftentimes when we think that we're thinking about ourselves, we're actually doing it for the benefit of ourselves and others. And once you've been able to determine all of that, maybe set up one or two things you can say are not negotiable, consider setting up some soft boundaries. Maybe the things you'd like to change, but don't need to change urgently. Maybe you want to get a better night's sleep, limit the amount of time you spend on social media, or less time doing work at night. Are there soft boundaries you can set to feel more productive, more creative, and rested at work and at home? Test them out. You might be surprised to see where they take you and just how easy they are to follow. Once you've said some things and tested the waters, reflect a little bit. The most important thing is to remember the process is flexible. You'll find boundaries don't limit you as much as you think. They actually give you the space to take part in the life God has called you to. And if you slip up, well, you could always return to your old habits, but most of the time, people discover some of the things they did before just don't work for them anymore. For me, one big boundary I've had to set up over the last 6 months or so has been with my diet. I had some not so good blood work come back, and the doctor gave me some recommendations, and one of the things I needed to cut out was added sugar. Now, for me, it's a soft boundary because, at first it was, that's it, no extra sugar, anything. But, I truly do make an effort to eat and make things with no added sugar in them. But if I'm out and about somewhere and we're getting some food or a snack, I will try to make healthy choices. I won't refuse to eat just because something has added sugar in it. But I've been able to manage the amount of quantity that I intake. And for me, that health change has been incredible. And since I haven't had those things in so long, things that are even just a little sweet now seem really sweet to me. It took some dedication and sometimes some strong will, but after 6 months, here I am, and that's a boundary I don't plan to go back from. So remember that guardrail analogy earlier. Guardrails, boundaries keep us on the path. They keep us from swaying too much, from going where we shouldn't go, from giving where we shouldn't give, from being involved where God doesn't call us to be. And maybe you're sitting there today saying, well, I have boundaries. I know my limits. I can control them. Well, I would challenge you to reconsider that statement and look closely. I challenge you to reflect and make sure your boundaries are not only established, but that you are strong in maintaining them. Boundaries aren't difficult to establish, as we allow ourselves to think they are. They take commitment to maintain, but the power is right within us, thanks to the power God has placed in each one of us. While we understand God can bring about true change in somebody's heart and life, including our own, it frees us from all of our panic-induced attempts to control others and allows us to feel more confident and comfortable in controlling our own boundaries. God has called each of us to tell the truth in love. He tells us to humbly control ourselves, graciously accept others, and overcome evil with good. And I know that might sound like a big task, but think of it this way. When we set those boundaries, He promises us wisdom in every circumstance. You, my friend, can do it. You can set healthy, effective boundaries that will be of benefit for you and your family for the days and years to come. Well, next time we'll be talking about the basics of relationships, your closest people, your spouse, your kids, the roots, and the bottom level relationship strategies God truly calls us to live out. Friends, it's been great being with you again. As always, I really do appreciate you tuning in this week. We'll see you back here next time when we'll have more for you on Cue.